Friends, the directive principles of state policy, which are enumerated in Part 4 of the Constitution of India, they extend from Article 36 to Article 51. Uh, DPSP, as we would want to say, Directive Principles of State Policy, is actually something very unique to the Constitution. It probably kind of demonstrates uh, that the fundamental law of the land, that is the Constitution of India, or the foundational law of the land, that is the Constitution of India, does want to give vision for governance. So these are directives, these are guidelines, these are things that the states ought to do. So directives, they are some principle that the state must follow. Directive principles of state policy. So the policies of the state are to be driven by what is mentioned in Articles 36 to 51. Interestingly, uh, if you see what the directive principles in totality want to achieve, I think they would want to achieve a fair and an equal society. Uh, as we speak today, 75 years from the time that we have gained our independence, uh, we are still grappling with poverty. We are still grappling to establish an egalitarian state. And the directive principles actually attempt to fulfill those mandates. And please note, like Graniel Austin has described DPSP, he said uh, they are the conscience of the Constitution. They are something that the Constitution holds firmly for. So, what is the philosophy of the Constitution can be set through the moral compass of what the directive principles have to state, right? So, these are the kind of moral guidelines or the moral principles. Please note, sometimes when we say moral or guidelines, you must be already thinking in your mind whether they're binding. May not be, however, they are the moral compass in the sense that the policies of the state can be tested whether they are in tune with the directive principles or they are not in tune with the directive principles, right? So that is something that directive principles of state policy can also come in. Um, so where did we get this idea of the directive principles of state policy? Friends, we got it from the Irish Constitution of 1937. And the Irish Constitution got it from the Spanish Constitution, and that's how the Indian Constitution borrows the same, kind of an idea as the case may be. So DPSP, friends, denotes that the state should keep in mind these principles while formulating policies and enacting laws. And that's why they are kind of instruction from the Constitution. They are, what the Constitution drafters would like the state to follow in its process. So you may say they are the instructions from the framers of the Constitution. They are a document of guidelines from the framers of the Constitution, and what the state is expected to do and not do is something that has been put across in a very comprehensive manner, I must say. Because please note, the directive principles of state policy cover the three aspects of justice. If you want to say political, economical, and social, and they aim to realize the preamble of the Constitution in trying to bring about justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. So I think that is what one would want to see uh, in the directive principles. But please note, what is in the directive principles are not justiciable. They are not enforceable. They are not binding in a court of law, because these are guidelines or principles. They are just kind of the foundation to what you must do and what you ought to do, but you can't literally enforce it and seek a grievance or redressal of that same through the means of either compensation or kind of asking the state precisely to do that immediately, right? So hence I think these are aims to achieve, but they need not be achieved at the immediate instance. There are several landmark judgments of the Supreme Court that have shaped the socio-economic policies of the nation, and I think those judgments of the Supreme Court are guided by the principles in DPSC. Um, Okay, let's look at you know DPSC in a sense that they are probably the first set of documents that state what shall be the public policy in India, what shall be the basis of public administration in India. So I think while public policy and public administration have been reimagined and reshaped and redesigned over a period of time, because I would say the public policy before 1991, post 1991 could have been entirely different. However, I think the first foundational public policy document for public administration, public policy for public administration, could be considered to be the directive principles of state policy. So, what DPSC are very important for us to appreciate and understand here, and we can think about what the contents are in the next slide. Okay, so just to give you a brief idea, I think the DPSC has clearly said that the kind of state that we have envisioned is a welfare state, a state that just seeks to bring welfare to its citizens. It is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. So, people's interest, or what we call as public interest, is paramount in public administration. So everything that needs to be done or ought to be done by the government must promote and nurture and take forward citizens' interest uh, uh, into consideration. I think some extent, few authors have said that the directive principles of state policy are having two broad principles. One is that the directive principles have been shaped with socialistic principles, and two, that the directive principles have been shaped through what we call as the Gandhian principle. There is also a third view of the liberal or intellectual principle that is there. But I think let's look at the three principles that have kind of guided DPSC. So, if you look at the content of the DPSCs, um, the first content that you see are all those are based on the socialistic principle. What is socialistic principle? It means that we must look at disparity of income between the haves and the have-nots. We have to ensure that wealth does not concentrate in the hands of few individuals. Adequate means of livelihood to all the citizens must be brought about. Inequality of income or status, facilities and opportunities must be eradicated as far as possible. We must try and ensure, the common good, this, subservient of the common good. And the common good is only driving force for state policies. Socialism is in terms of distribution of resources, which shall be equitable only. So, directive principle says all that. It talks about equal pay for equal work. It talks about preservation of health and the strength of workers and children. No forceful abuse of work, and healthy development of children is what is aimed for. The directive principles of state policy, which has the component or is based on the socialistic principle, also talks about promotion of equal justice and free legal aid, or what we call as providing legal aid to the poor or providing access to justice for the poor. Right to work, right to education, public assistance to those who are unemployed, old, sick, and disabled. So if you read Article 41, you will notice, friends, that public assistance in cases of unemployment, old age, sickness, and disablement are provided for. Making workplace just and humane, bringing in conditions of maternity and paternity leaves are all provided in Article 42. Securing a living wage. Now, this is not minimum wage, it's a living wage under the Constitution. That is the distinction that we make. Because minimum wage is the economic parameter, living wage is the actual reality parameter. And a living wage which can ensure you a decent standard of life, social and cultural opportunities to all workers must be ensured, and that is what Article 43 of the DPSC says, or the Constitution of India says. Participation of workers in the management. Look, the Constitution looks at labor reforms and labor rights, collective bargaining, and the spirit of the collective bargaining. 43A says that the states must take steps to secure the participation of workers in the management of industries. To raise the level of nutrition, look, the midday meal scheme, and so on and so forth, and the standard of living of people and improvement of public health is provided in Article 47. So I think here, from the kind of list of principles that I've just stated, the socialistic principle is definitely reflected in the Constitution of India. It's the socialistic ideology that is the bedrock of the constitutional structure and state policy, as the case may be. Now, the second principle that is quite evident from reading the directive principles of state policy is the Gandhian principle. Uh, the Gandhian ideology or the philosophy of Ram Rajya. Gandhi believed in a national movement, and his ideals of directive principles of state policy are, for example, the following. First, he believed in decentralized government, he believed in empowering the village panchayat. He wanted local self government to be established, and the unit of self governance should be the best model of governance in certain subjects, in certain areas. So, if you read Article 40, local self government is something that is mandated. Panchayats are to be empowered and created, and they must be enabled to function on their own. That is the first point where Gandhi's philosophy and ideology is reflected. Second, Article 43 clearly is a reflection of Gandhi's way of life. It talks about promotion of cottage industry. Today, I may say that the cottage industry is like a small scale unit. It is like a startup. So, if people want to engage themselves in entrepreneurship or entrepreneur skills, the state government must facilitate the same, and this could be done either individually or, like Article 43 says, through the cooperative movement. So the rural areas must be able to produce goods and sell the goods. They must be able to creatively establish their enterprising skills. That is also, I believe, a Gandhian introduction. Uh, Autonomous functioning or democratic control and professional management of cooperatives. Article 43B says that the cooperative movement is one of the most important movements that the state must encourage, promote, and bring into existence, because the cooperative movement is completely parallel to the corporate movement. The corporate movement is profit oriented, the cooperative movement is oriented towards enriching the members of the cooperative. And the producers or the manufacturers who are the members of the cooperative get direct access to the market, and they get direct benefits or profits from the market. The cooperative movement, as the case is, has always helped India in the food security system. It has helped bring about green revolution. It has brought access from the farmers to the consumers directly, taking away the middleman out. And most importantly, the cooperative movement has been very competitive with the pricing, and hence this also adds to the consumer or citizen interest. So 43B clearly says that cooperative societies must be encouraged, because these are voluntary formations, they are autonomous functioning, they have a democratic and a professional management. Something like the milk federation cooperatives that are there in several states, led by Amul, is a great example of achievement of Article 43B. Educational uh, interest of the SC/STs, or what we say the economically weaker section of the community. They must get themselves protection from social inequalities and injustices or exploitation, and Article 46 mandates the same. So Gandhi's idea of Harijans and their special protection and special status is something that the constitution does cover upon. Uh, the consumption of intoxicated drinks or drugs that are injurious to the health comes under Article 47. Very importantly, your attention to Article 48. Article 48 very clearly directs the state to prohibit the slaughter of cows, calves, and other milch and draught cattle so that their breed can be improved. So please note this, cow slaughter legislations which have been revived are not new. They are part of the constitution itself, that the states are to protect cows from being slaughtered. So Article 48 has that mandate for the states. So most of the anti-cow slaughtering legislations were passed in the 1950s and 60s. The only thing what has happened very recently is that the punishments have been enhanced, and the process of investigation or holding someone criminally responsible has been probably strengthened through some of the amendments that were brought in the recent times. So, socialistic principle in the DPSC, the Gandhian principle in the DPSC, and finally coming to the liberal principles, or what we have called the intellectual principles of DPSC. What are they? Friends, first is, I think, Article 44, the contentious issue on Uniform Civil Code. This requires a lot of liberal approach from the state itself, and that's why it is called the liberal ideology of the DPSC. It requires people to move away from religion and detach themselves from unequal practices of religion, uh, and to achieve greater common good, and to promote the equality of genders. I think Article 44, as it were in the Constitution, very clearly had stated to the state bringing uniform civil code. Had it been brought during those days when citizens did not, like today, voice their concern, I think by now, 60 or 70 years of India independence, I think we could have had a fair, equal society between men and women of all religions. But anyway, that is now being attempted to provide early childhood care and education of all children. Right now, this is under Right to Education 21A, but Article 45 talks about the same. To organize agriculture and animal husbandry on modern and scientific lines, Article 48 again. To protect and improve the environment and safeguard forest and wildlife, Article 48A. To promote and protect monuments and places and objects of historic and artistic, national importance kind of structures, Article 49. To separate the judiciary from the executive in the public service of the state, Article 50, very important. To separate judiciary from the executive in the public service of the state, Article. So the judicial appointments or the judicial independence in appointment is also something that was clearly reflected in Article 50. So if the judiciary has crafted on its own basis about how it should select judges, I think Article 50 is one such provision of the Constitution that supports the independentness of judicial appointments. Finally, Article 51. Now, this is the final and the crucial part. It is to promote international peace and security and maintain just and honorable relationships or relations with nations. So this is also a mandate to the states, not only to the central or federal government. Even states must promote international peace, um, and to foster respect for international law. See, look at the critical aspect over here, that international law is no longer weak; it's to be respected. Uh, all treaty obligations of the state must be also honored, and to encourage settlement of international dispute by arbitration is what is being written in Article 51. Uh, in 1976, through the 42nd Amendment, uh, you will notice that to the original principles, we added four new directive principles. What are they? Let's just take into consideration. So in 1976, we said in Article 39, we said to secure opportunity of healthy development of children. So we added that. To promote equal justice and to provide free legal aid in Article 39A, we added it. In Article 43A, we said to take steps to secure workers' participation. And finally, in Article 48A, we added to protect and improve the environment and safeguard forest and wildlife. So this is now a mandate of the state. What is mandate of the state? To protect and improve the environment and to safeguard forest and wildlife is something that the states ought to do. And this is where the 42nd Amendment of 1976 added it. 44th Amendment in 1978 added one more directive principle, that is the state to minimize inequality in income, status, facilities, and opportunities. This was in Article 38. In 2002, the 86th Amendment Act to the Constitution made elementary education a fundamental right under Article 21, so that was changed. And in 2011, the 97th Amendment Act added a new directive principle in relation to cooperatives, which I already have said in Article 43B.